The critical breakthrough came 2 months later, in September 2013. A local worker was cutting through the thick mangrove brush on Isla Caranero when he stumbled upon something unsettling. Hidden beneath the swampy overgrowth, partially submerged in stagnant water, was an old military-style backpack. Curious but cautious, the worker unzipped the bag, unsure of what he might find. What he discovered sent chills down his spine, prompting him to immediately notify the authorities. Forensic specialists carefully retrieved the backpack and conducted a thorough examination. Inside, they found personal belongings and biological evidence. DNA analysis later confirmed the worst fears. The items inside belonged to Yvonne Baldelli. Yvonne Baldelli entered the world on June 30, 1969, in a quiet, sun-soaked town nestled in the southern part of California. From an early age, those close to her noticed her natural creativity, ambition, and a spark for life that seemed to set her apart. Yvonne grew up in a loving family environment that encouraged her to dream big, work hard, and stay connected to her roots. Yvonne dreamed not only of creating beautiful clothing, but also of building a successful business that reflected her love for creativity and style. Her personal life, however, was filled with its share of challenges. Yvonne experienced 2 marriages over the years, both of which ended in heartbreak and separation. Despite her efforts to build a stable home life, neither union stood the test of time. Adding to her emotional struggles, Yvonne faced a painful personal setback due to medical complications from a surgery she underwent as a young woman, which left her unable to have children of her own. While this was a devastating blow, Yvonne never let it define her spirit or stop her from finding joy in life. Despite her ups and downs, Yvonne maintained a close and loving relationship with her family. She prioritized visiting them at least once a month, making time to stay connected no matter how busy life became. She was particularly close to her father and sister, Michelle Valenzuela, calling them nearly every day to share stories, updates, or simply hear their voices. Family was her anchor, and she often turned to them for strength and guidance. As Yvonne approached her 40th birthday in 2009, she was eager to embark on a new chapter in her life. It was during this time that she met Brian Brimmiger, a tall, athletic, and charming man who was serving as a Marine. With his sun-kissed complexion, confident demeanor, and captivating smile, Brian quickly caught Yvonne's attention. At the time, he was married and raising a young son with his wife, yet that didn't prevent him from pursuing a relationship outside of his marriage. Brian painted a picture of dissatisfaction with his home life, expressing his frustration and explaining to Yvonne that he stayed in his marriage only for the sake of his child. Yvonne, who understood the complexities of difficult relationships all too well, sympathized with his situation. She had been through painful separations herself and believed that the well-being of a child should always come first. Trusting his words, she didn't pressure him for immediate decisions, convinced that love, patience, and understanding would eventually bring clarity to their situation. But behind Brian's charismatic facade was a far more complicated reality. His good looks and confident nature had made him popular with women for years, and unbeknownst to Yvonne, she wasn't the only woman captivated by his charm. As their relationship deepened, it came to light that Brian was simultaneously involved with another woman, a successful, striking blonde named Christine Verhoeven. Christine held an influential position as a White House analyst during George W. Bush Jr.'s presidency and was known for her high-level political connections and intelligence. When Yvonne discovered the truth, it was a crushing blow, yet she was determined not to lose the man she believed to be her soulmate. Gathering all her courage, she confronted the situation head-on. In a bold move, Yvonne reached out to Brian's wife and revealed not only his affair with herself, but also his involvement with Christine. The revelation sparked considerable turmoil, forcing Brian to face the consequences of his actions. Amid the scandal and emotional fallout, Brian made the decision to divorce his wife. Whether it was out of love for Yvonne or the mounting pressure from the exposed affairs, he officially separated from his spouse and moved in with Yvonne several months later. Though his military career was still ongoing, Brian had been contemplating leaving the Marines for some time. Meanwhile, Yvonne's family remained wary. They questioned Brian's sincerity, sensing that beneath his charming surface, there was more to the story than met the eye. In the summer of 2011, Brian began to express a desire for radical change. Tired of the demands of military life and the fast pace of city living, he envisioned a peaceful existence on a tropical island where they could both start fresh. Yvonne, ever supportive and deeply in love, stood by his side. She believed in his dreams and was willing to follow him anywhere, convinced she had finally found the person who would share her life's greatest adventures. By September of that year, their plans were set. The couple made the bold decision to relocate to a small, remote island in Panama called Isla Carnero, part of the picturesque Bocas del Toro archipelago. The island was often described as a hidden paradise, with lush landscapes, crystal-clear waters, and an inviting, laid-back atmosphere. Before their departure, Yvonne shared her exciting plans with her family. Though her loved ones tried to dissuade her, expressing concern about moving so far away with a man they barely trusted, Yvonne remained resolute. She left her job, sold her apartment, and packed her belongings with high hopes of turning her dreams into reality. She longed to open a boutique selling personalized clothing and handmade accessories to the island's many tourists. It was a chance to combine her lifelong passion with a new beginning. In September, Yvonne, Brian, and her beloved dog boarded a plane to Panama. After spending several days in the country's bustling capital, they took a ferry to Isla Carnero, where they rented a modest house along the shoreline. Life on the island was a stark contrast to their former routines. The weather was consistently warm and humid, drawing surfers, divers, and travelers from around the globe. Despite its beauty, the island was small, just an hour's walk from one end to the other, and much of its interior was dense jungle, filled with hazardous wildlife such as venomous snakes, spiders, and other creatures best avoided. Brian, a talented musician since childhood, brought his guitar, determined to carve out a new life playing music in the island's nightclubs. Within a week, he had made connections with several local bar owners, securing his first gigs. But with the nightlife came heavy drinking, fueled by enthusiastic patrons offering him endless rounds. His drinking habits quickly escalated, which began to cast a shadow over their new life. Meanwhile, Yvonne's dream business struggled to gain traction. Tourist sales were minimal, and turning a profit proved far more difficult than she anticipated. But she refused to give up. To support herself, she took a part-time job at a local bar, all while caring for their dog, and eventually adopting another stray she found wandering the island's sandy streets. Yvonne remained in constant contact with her sister Michelle, sharing details of island life and her ongoing efforts to settle in. But over time, the tone of her messages shifted. Her texts became shorter, more infrequent, and carried an underlying sadness that her family couldn't ignore. The once vibrant, hopeful woman they knew seemed to be fading into the background of an unfamiliar, isolated world. As the weeks turned into months, cracks in Yvonne and Brian's relationship became more apparent. Despite the promises and plans they made, Brian continuously delayed any formal commitment, and his distant behavior began to erode the bond they once shared. The island life, which was supposed to bring them closer, only exposed their differences. Arguments replaced laughter, and the once hopeful atmosphere grew tense. It didn't take long for their relationship to unravel completely. Meanwhile, back in the United States, Yvonne's family, especially her sister Michelle Valenzuela, started to feel uneasy. Yvonne had always stayed in close contact with her family, often sharing details of her day, her challenges, and her dreams. So when the regular texts and phone calls stopped abruptly at the beginning of December 2011, Michelle's concern quickly escalated. Days passed in silence, and then, on December 14th, Michelle received an unexpected phone call that would only deepen her worries. It was Brian. His voice on the other end was calm but distant, as he casually asked when he could pick up his SUV, which had been stored in Michelle's garage before he and Yvonne left for Panama. This call took Michelle by complete surprise. If Brian was back in the United States, where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she reached out to her family, especially given how close they were? These questions raced through Michelle's mind. When confronted, Brian casually stated that he had already explained everything in an email sent a few days earlier. Furthermore, he claimed that Yvonne herself had also sent a message to Michelle, providing details about her decision to part ways with him and her new plans. Feeling increasingly unsettled, Michelle checked her inbox and discovered two unread messages, one from Brian and another, supposedly, from Yvonne. In Brian's email, he stated that Yvonne had ended their relationship and run off to Costa Rica with a new love interest. He painted the picture of a sudden, impulsive decision on Yvonne's part, suggesting that she had abandoned him without much discussion. The second message, allegedly written by Yvonne, echoed Brian's claims. In it, she mentioned discovering Brian's infidelity and learning that he had fathered a child with another woman. According to the email, Yvonne had fallen for someone new and had left Panama to start over in Costa Rica. On the surface, it sounded plausible, especially considering that the other woman in question turned out to be Christine Verhoeven, a former acquaintance of Brian's who had been part of his life long before he and Yvonne ever set foot in Panama. Christine, a successful White House analyst with connections and a high-profile career, had reportedly been pregnant around the same time that Brian and Yvonne relocated to the island. Given that Yvonne was unable to have children due to past medical complications, the story had an air of believability. But something didn't sit right with Michelle. Her sister had always been measured, thoughtful, and careful in her decisions. It was completely out of character for Yvonne to suddenly run off without telling her family, especially during such significant life changes. Moreover, the tone and phrasing in the email attributed to Yvonne felt oddly unfamiliar, detached, and not reflective of the sister she knew so well. Growing more suspicious by the day, Michelle urged Brian to accompany her to the authorities to file a missing person report. Brian appeared uneasy, but insisted it wasn't necessary. He claimed Yvonne was perfectly capable of making her own decisions, and that she would contact her family when she was ready. His dismissive attitude only added to Michelle's fears, but Brian was quick to retrieve his car and leave, offering little further explanation. Not long after that encounter, Michelle received a voice message supposedly from Yvonne, stating that she would be returning home for their father's birthday in January. Wanting to believe her sister was safe, Michelle decided to wait, holding on to the hope that Yvonne would soon walk through the door, offering explanations in person. But January came and went, and Yvonne never returned. No calls, no texts, total silence. The situation grew even more concerning when Michelle learned that Brian had recently married Christine Verhoeven, a development that seemed highly questionable given that only weeks prior, he claimed his relationship with Yvonne had just ended. Everything about the timeline felt off, raising further doubts about Brian's honesty. Eventually, Michelle could no longer shake the nagging fear that something far more serious had happened to her sister. With Yvonne still missing and no verifiable proof of her whereabouts, Michelle reported her disappearance to law enforcement. Authorities promptly opened an investigation, initiating communication with Panamanian officials to trace Yvonne's last known movements. The results were troubling. Despite Brian's claims that Yvonne had fled to Costa Rica, official inquiries confirmed that there was no record of Yvonne ever leaving Panama. She had not passed through any border checkpoints, nor had she booked any travel under her name. The story Brian shared began to unravel. Determined to uncover the truth, Michelle enlisted the help of a cousin with technical expertise. A skilled computer programmer, he traced the IP addresses of the emails allegedly sent by Yvonne. The results were damning. Both the message from Brian and the message claiming to be from Yvonne originated from the same location, Dana Point, California, where Brian had been residing upon his return to the United States. With this discovery in hand, Michelle contacted the police once more, providing them with the new evidence. She expressed her growing fears that Brian had harmed her sister while they were in Panama, and had been using her identity to send deceptive emails and voice messages, misleading the family into believing Yvonne was safe and traveling. Unfortunately, while the evidence raised significant concerns, it was still largely circumstantial at the time. Law enforcement lacked the concrete proof needed to make an arrest, though they began questioning Brian and closely monitoring his actions. As the investigation deepened, more unsettling facts came to light. Authorities discovered that Brian had been secretly involved with Christine Verhoeven throughout his entire time in Panama with Yvonne. Even more shocking, he had proposed to Christine while still living on the island with Yvonne, all without Christine knowing about his other relationship. In the midst of this tangled situation, Christine gave birth to their daughter, unaware of the full extent of Brian's deception. Seeking more answers, Christine contacted Don Winner, a former American intelligence officer turned private investigator with expertise in locating missing U.S. citizens abroad. With years of experience and a wide network of contacts, Winner immediately sensed that the situation was far more dire than it appeared on the surface. After hearing Michelle's account of her sister's disappearance and the inconsistencies in Brian's narrative, Winner shared her fears. He believed the chances of Yvonne being safe were slim, but he wasn't willing to let the case go unnoticed. Using his professional connections and investigative resources, Winner began to pressure Panamanian authorities, urging them to prioritize the case. The story of Yvonne's disappearance soon gained international attention. News outlets picked up the troubling account of the missing American woman, and public interest grew. The peaceful island paradise that had once seemed like a dream destination was now at the center of a deeply concerning investigation. As the investigation into Yvonne Baldelli's sudden disappearance continued, her family refused to sit idly by. Deeply worried and determined to uncover the truth, they began reaching out to residents of Isla Carnero, hoping to find anyone who had interacted with Yvonne and Brian or had noticed anything unusual about them in the weeks leading up to Yvonne's vanishing. It didn't take long for concerning reports to surface. Locals described the couple's relationship as increasingly strained, marked by frequent public arguments that often escalated late into the night. Several neighbors admitted they had heard loud shouting, harsh language, and the sound of objects being thrown from the home the pair had rented near the coast. Their heated disputes were no secret on the small island, where word traveled fast and few things went unnoticed. The property owner, who had leased the beach house to Yvonne and Brian, later confirmed to investigators that he had received multiple complaints from neighboring residents. The reports described aggressive quarrels, loud disturbances, and a general atmosphere of tension surrounding the couple. The once promising new beginning on a tropical island had clearly deteriorated into conflict and instability. As concern mounted, law enforcement agencies took decisive action. A specialized team of divers was deployed to the waters surrounding Isla Carnero, scouring the ocean floor for any evidence that might reveal what had happened to Yvonne. Their search was exhaustive, covering the rocky shorelines, mangrove forests, and the shallow coastal waters known for attracting tourists. Unfortunately, after days of investigation, the dive teams came up empty-handed, finding no clues to help solve the troubling mystery. Despite mounting suspicions pointing toward Brian Brimmager, authorities lacked concrete evidence to accuse him of wrongdoing. From the start, Brian had maintained the same narrative, that Yvonne had discovered his infidelity, left him behind, and escaped to Costa Rica with a new romantic partner. He consistently denied any involvement in her disappearance, portraying himself as heartbroken and abandoned. However, investigators were determined to peel back the layers of this complex case. Nearly a year after Yvonne's disappearance, on September 21, 2012, law enforcement officials executed a search warrant at Brian Brimmager's California residence. By that time, Brian was unemployed, staying at home to care for his young daughter, while his wife, Christine Verhoeven, maintained her professional career. During the search, Brian initially appeared composed, repeating his claims that Yvonne had left him after learning about his child with Christine. But when police revealed they had traced emails, sent under Yvonne's name, to an IP address linked to Brian's neighborhood, his calm exterior began to crack. The mounting pressure exposed his discomfort, and cracks began to appear in his carefully rehearsed story. Meanwhile, private investigator Don Winner, an expert in missing persons cases with a background in intelligence, continued digging into Brian's activities before and after his return from Panama. Winner discovered that Brian had sold a machete shortly after arriving back in California. Disturbingly, in an online conversation with the buyer, Brian had made a dark joke, claiming the blade had only been used once, to hit a stripper. Though the comment was likely intended as humor, its morbid nature alarmed investigators, prompting them to track down the new owner of the weapon. The machete was recovered and analyzed, but initially, it yielded no definitive forensic evidence. Further investigation revealed another troubling detail. Brian had used Yvonne's bank card in a calculated attempt to support his version of events. He traveled to Costa Rica after her disappearance, withdrawing cash from various ATMs in the capital city of San Jose. By using her card in these locations, he hoped to create a false trail, suggesting that Yvonne had indeed run off to start a new life abroad. Once the account was drained, Brian discarded the card, believing the deception would go unnoticed. However, he underestimated modern surveillance. Security cameras at multiple ATMs clearly captured him making the withdrawals, directly undermining his claims. Despite these mounting inconsistencies, it took considerable time to build a strong enough case. Finally, in July 2013, nearly 18 months after Yvonne was last seen, Brian Brimmiger was arrested. At that stage, he was not yet charged with a violent crime, but rather with obstructing the investigation and falsifying information related to the case. By then, Brian and Christine had welcomed their second child together, deepening the complex web of family dynamics. During questioning, Brian repeatedly denied any responsibility for Yvonne's fate. Even when presented with opportunities to tell the truth, he insisted on his innocence, maintaining that he had no knowledge of what happened to his former partner. Authorities, however, remained unconvinced, especially as more evidence emerged. A significant breakthrough arrived 2 months later in September 2013. A local worker, cutting through the dense marshland on Isla Carnero, stumbled upon an unsettling discovery. Hidden among the swampy underbrush, partially submerged in stagnant water, was an old military-style backpack. The worker, curious yet cautious, opened the bag, unsure of what he might find. What he discovered prompted immediate alarm, leading him to contact local authorities. The backpack was carefully retrieved and examined by forensic experts. Inside were personal items and biological evidence later confirmed through DNA analysis to belong to Yvonne Baldelli. This discovery dramatically altered the course of the investigation. Armed with new, irrefutable proof, authorities officially charged Brian Brimmiger with multiple offenses, including murder, dismemberment, and obstruction of justice. The case, which had stretched across international borders, now had tangible evidence linking Brian to Yvonne's disappearance and presumed death. Meanwhile, Yvonne's sister, Michelle Valenzuela, faced her own battle. At the beginning of 2014, Michelle was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer already in an advanced stage. In her relentless pursuit of justice for Yvonne, Michelle had neglected her own health, delaying medical checkups and ignoring warning signs. Doctors informed her that her prognosis was grim, and intense treatment over 6 months yielded little progress. Despite her declining health, Michelle remained steadfast in her mission to seek justice for her sister. In September 2014, after learning that her time was limited, she made the courageous decision to testify in court against Brian Brimmiger. Weak but determined, she delivered a detailed account of everything she knew, presenting emails, messages, and records of conversations that exposed the inconsistencies in Brian's story. The effort left her physically exhausted, and shortly after providing her statement, Michelle's health rapidly deteriorated. Just 3 days later, she passed away, but her testimony would prove vital to the case. During the trial, prosecutors argued that on the night of November 26, 2011, following yet another argument, triggered by Yvonne confronting Brian about his ongoing relationship with Christine, the situation spiraled out of control. Intoxicated and enraged, Brian allegedly struck Yvonne during the dispute, causing fatal injuries. Investigators later discovered that the mattress from their rented beach house, stained with blood, had been discarded over the edge of a rocky cliff into the ocean. Additionally, the backpack containing Yvonne's remains had been dragged deep into the island's swampy terrain in an effort to conceal the crime. Remarkably, after Yvonne's disappearance, Brian remained on Isla Carnero for weeks, going to great lengths to fabricate his story. He told island residents that Yvonne had abruptly left him for a new partner, playing the role of the abandoned lover seeking sympathy. His deception extended further when he began a short-lived relationship with another woman on the island, Nicole Powell, who initially believed his version of events. However, Nicole Powell would later play a critical role in the case. During the trial, she testified against Brian, describing his controlling behavior, dishonesty, and attempts to manipulate those around him. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including digital records, financial transactions, and eyewitness testimony, Brian finally admitted to his involvement but claimed self-defense. He alleged that Yvonne had attacked him with a knife during their argument, and he acted to protect himself. Prosecutors, however, presented a different narrative. They highlighted Brian's suspicious internet searches, his elaborate attempts to hide evidence, and his misleading communications designed to deceive both Yvonne's family and law enforcement. These actions, they argued, were not the marks of someone caught in a moment of self-defense, but rather signs of premeditation and calculated deception. In the spring of 2016, the court reached its conclusion. Brian Brimmiger was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and other related offenses. While many believed the circumstances warranted a life sentence, the judge took into consideration Brian's military service and other factors, sentencing him to 26 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 2035. Throughout the trial, Christine Verhoeven, Brian's wife and the mother of his children, stood by him, expressing unwavering belief in his innocence. Despite the verdict, she maintained that her husband was not capable of such a crime, leaving the case as a lingering reminder of the complexities and heartbreak at the center of this tragic story.